In the sweltering heat of a June afternoon, beneath a sky as harsh as the sun itself, a scene unfolded in Lakewood Springs that would sear itself into the memory of all who witnessed it. A young woman, barely 19, stood on a makeshift platform, her fate to be decided by the highest bidder. Her parents' faces etched with the lines of a life too hard stood by their expressions, void of emotion, as if they had already detached from the grotesque transaction about to unfold. $20 for the last loss of the day. The sheriff's voice boomed, cutting through the heavy air, his announcement echoing off the dusty square. The crowd, a mix of awkward silence and morbid fascination, watched as the girl's eyes remained fixed on the ground, her disheveled hair veiling a bruise that spoke of recent violence. From the back of this gathered throng, Isaiah Montgomery, a 42-year-old widower, clenched his fists. The only black landowner in Lakewood Springs, he felt the weight of his decision pressing upon him. His heart ached as he observed the girl, her vulnerability palpable, her future uncertain. 25 came a hoarse shout from across the street. Frank Holloway, the local tavern owner, raised his hand, his smile revealing more than just a bid. It hinted at darker intentions. The girl shuddered, her body trembling under the scrutiny. $30. Another voice called out, this one belonging to Walter Schmidt, known for his temper, especially when liquor had its way with him. Isaiah closed his eyes, a fleeting moment of despair crossing his features. $30 was all he had left, the sum he had earmarked for seeds to plant hope back into the earth that had been scorched by drought. It was his final chance to salvage the land he had toiled so hard to keep after his wife's untimely death. $50, Dorm. Isaiah's voice, deep and resonant, sliced through the murmurs of the crowd. The square fell into a stunned silence, all eyes turning towards him, their expressions a mix of shock, indignation, and something else, perhaps a hint of respect or fear. The girl's father's eyes narrowed, greed battling with disdain as he looked at the man who dared to challenge the unspoken rules of their society. As Isaiah Montgomery stepped closer, his voice rang out like a challenge. $70 in gold coins. The sheriff, visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. Mr. Montgomery, I don't believe you. But Isaiah cut him off, his eyes unwavering. The law states any free man can partake in a public auction, unless you're eager to explain to a federal judge why you turned down the highest bid. For the first time since the auction started, the young woman raised her gaze, her eyes meeting Isaiah's. There was no flicker of hope, only a profound resignation, a weariness etched deep into someone so young. 70 once, the sheriff announced with a hint of reluctance. Holloway and Schmidt exchanged uneasy glances, but the room fell silent. Sold, the sheriff declared, his small gavel striking with a finality that echoed through the square, igniting a storm of indignant murmurs. As Isaiah moved to finalize the payment, memories flooded back like a torrent. His late wife Abigail, humiliated in this very square years ago when they tried to expel them from town. The simple grave where she lay, a victim of pneumonia no local doctor had been willing to treat, and the oppressive solitude of his cabin since her passing. The young woman descended from the platform, her steps hesitant, each movement weighed down by an unseen burden. Closer now, Isaiah noticed the faint bruises marring her arms, badges of a life too harsh for one so young. She kept her eyes cast down as if she had learned long ago that to look up was to invite punishment. What is your name? Isaiah asked, his voice soft, maintaining a respectful distance. Sarah, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Sarah Collins. Isaiah nodded, introducing himself. I'm Isaiah Montgomery. To his surprise, she responded, I know who you are. Everyone does. As they moved away from the square, the crowd's murmurs swelled. Good God, they sold the girl to a black man. This won't. As their journey continued, a palpable tension hung in the air, thick with the unspoken fears and silent prayers of the townsfolk. Isaiah felt each hostile stare like a dagger slicing through the fabric of his resolve. Sarah, ever the shadow at his heel, moved with the grace of one trained to follow, not lead. Their passage by the tavern was marked by Frank Holloway's disdainful spit on the dusty ground, his voice dripping with mockery. 70's a steep price for something fleeting, Montgomery. He jeered, his words slicing through the crowd like a bitter wind. Isaiah, his face a mask of stoic indifference, did not dignify the taunt with a response. He pressed forward, his steps heavy with the burden of the world, toward the wagon where his old horse stood, a silent sentinel of time. As he assisted Sarah onto the wagon, he felt her body tremble, not with fear of him, but with the dread of what awaited her. "I won't harm you," he whispered, his voice, a gentle promise meant only for her ears. For the first time, her gaze met his eyes wide with a mix of terror and something else, something fierce and unyielding. "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper, a single word that carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Isaiah hesitated, his hands gripping the reins. As the wagon began to roll, he answered, "Because I've walked the path of being treated as less than human." The wheels creaked under the strain, pulling them away from the town's scrutiny. Unseen by all, Sarah slipped a small metallic object into her shoe, her actions swift and secretive. Her eyes met those of a shadowy figure for a fleeting moment, a silent conversation in a language known only to those bound by survival. There was more to this quiet woman than met the eye, a depth of character that would soon alter the destiny of Lakewood Springs. In her, Isaiah saw not just a victim, but a beacon of resilience, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. How often do we overlook the silent battles fought in the shadows, the quiet revolutions that change the course of lives? Compassion like a wildfire will ignite a revolution in that town, leaving an indelible mark on its history. Isaiah's cabin stood 6 miles from the heart of the town, nestled amidst fields gasping for moisture in a small whispering oak forest. As twilight surrendered to night, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into a realm of indigo and shadows. Sarah, with a gaze that pierced the dusk, scrutinized the homestead. The humble yet lovingly tended cabin, the barn modest in size but sturdy, and a stone well encircled by a garden that had known better days, all under the watchful eye of the encroaching darkness. "This is it," Isaiah declared, his voice a gentle rumble as he descended from the wagon. "It's not much, but it's mine. Here you'll find sanctuary. No one will intrude." Yet Sarah remained perched on the wagon, her eyes darting, calculating her mind, mapping out potential escape routes, like a wild creature sensing a trap. When she finally alighted, she kept her distance, her body tense, ready for flight. "There's a room at the back," Isaiah continued, pointing towards the cabin. "It was my son's. It has a lock on the inside for privacy." The mention of a son, a life once vibrant, now silenced, caused Sarah's expression to cloud. "Your son?" she inquired, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jacob, he passed with his mother. Pneumonia took them both 2 winters ago." Isaiah responded, his tone steady, free from the weight of sorrow. "He was 5. Upon entering, the soft glow of a lamp on the central table greeted them, a silent testament to a recent presence. Sarah's body tensed, her instincts on high alert. "Wait here," Isaiah urged, sensing her unease. He returned moments later, his demeanor relaxed. "Ruth was here. She left food." At the name, Sarah's reaction was palpable. "Ruth Wilkins, the midwife?" she asked, her voice tinged with recognition. Isaiah nodded surprise. "You know her?" "She delivered my mother once," Sarah replied, her voice trailing off into evasion. The cabin, though simple, bore the hallmark of meticulous care. Books lined up with precision on makeshift shelves, a cedar table worn by time, yet polished to a reflective sheen. This was not the dwelling of a man defeated by life's cruelties, but a bastion of resilience, a place where one chose to stand firm against the tides of fate. "You're planning to flee tonight, aren't you?" Isaiah asked during dinner, his voice calm yet piercing, causing Sarah to freeze her fork, suspended in midair. As the sun climbed higher, the morning air crackled with tension, the atmosphere as taut as a violin string poised to snap. "I don't blame you." Isaiah's voice carried a weight, his words measured, deliberate. "But there are 3 men patrolling the eastern forest. Bounty hunters hired by the mayor after 3 slaves escaped from the Sullivan plantation." His revelation hung heavy in the air. Sarah, her spirit unyielding, retorted, "I'm not a slave." Isaiah, with a nod of understanding, replied, No, you're not. But try explaining that to those men in the dark. The morning light crept into the room, revealing the emptiness of the house, the door left ajar, a silent testament to her freedom. Peering through the window, Sarah watched Isaiah, his figure bent over the parched earth, coaxing life back into the withering garden with each bucket of well water. Her search through the house for any valuables was interrupted by a startling discovery, a book of federal laws, its pages marked with meticulous notes, and beside it letters signed by a Professor Williams from Boston University. The air was thick with the scent of impending change. Before she could delve deeper into this mysterious find, the sound of hooves broke the morning stillness. Three horsemen approached their presence like a storm cloud over the peaceful homestead. Sarah recognized Frank Holloway, the cruel smirk of Walter Schmidt, and a third man elegantly dressed, his expression a mask of calculated friendliness. Isaiah, letting the hoe fall from his hands, strode forward, his stature tall, his face a mask of impassivity. Montgomery Holloway greeted, his tone dripping with false warmth. "We've come to introduce Mr. Davis, the new county judge." The tall man offered a bow, his greeting as cold as his eyes. "Mr. Montgomery, I've heard a great deal about you. We're here for a property inspection." Judge Davis stated, his voice smooth yet devoid of warmth. "To update the county records." "My taxes are paid," Isaiah responded, his voice steady. "They always are." Schmidt's malicious smile cut through the air. "It's not about taxes," he interjected. "It's about suitability. Unproductive land may be requisitioned for more efficient use." Davis added his words like a vice tightening around the homestead's future. Sarah, watching from the shadows, felt her heart clench as she saw Isaiah's jaw tighten, though his expression remained a fortress of calm. "This property has been registered in my name since 1869 with all the proper documents," Isaiah stated, his voice unwavering. "Times change, Montgomery." Holloway's laughter echoed, a sound as hollow as the promises they brought with them. Laws evolve, their decrees shifting like the sands of time. When the men finally departed, Sarah stood before Isaiah, her voice trembling with urgency. "They want your land," she implored, her eyes searching his for understanding. "They always have," Isaiah replied with a calm that belied the storm brewing within him, returning to his work as if nothing had transpired. "But why, it's practically ruined by the drought?" Sarah's frustration was palpable, her words slicing through the heavy air. Isaiah paused, his gaze distant. "Because there's something here worth far more than mere acres of parched earth." That afternoon, Ruth Wilkins, a formidable middle-aged black woman with a piercing gaze, arrived in her covered wagon. She brought not just supplies and seeds, but also news that seemed to hang heavy in the air. "The new judge visited 5 properties today," she said, her eyes scanning Sarah's bruises with a knowing look. "All belonging to blacks or immigrants." Isaiah nodded, his expression one of grim confirmation. Ruth then handed him a sealed envelope. "This arrived today on the telegraph. Jenkins asked me to deliver it discreetly." As Isaiah read, his face transformed from one of concern to a mask of cold determination. "Sarah," he called out, his voice steady but urgent, "I need to know exactly what you heard at your father's meetings with Mayor Marshall." The shock on Sarah's face was fleeting. "How do you know about that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why?" Ruth interjected gently, her eyes softening. "You're not the first young woman we've tried to help escape that family." In that moment, Sarah's perception shifted. The object in her shoe, a small ornate key, now felt infinitely heavier. "My father keeps a red book locked in his desk." She finally revealed, her words heavy with the weight of secrets. "It contains payment records, names, dates. Mayor Marshall is organizing something big, something involving Judge Davis and land along the river." Isaiah and Ruth exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Was this the reason her father was willing to auction her off so publicly? Sarah nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I've heard too much. I've seen too much." In town, whispers spread like wildfire, tales of the black man who dared to buy a white girl at an auction. But what was the true cost of this defiance? What secrets lay buried beneath the sun-scorched land? and what battles would be fought over its hidden treasures. New was that the whispers of change had already begun to echo through the very walls they thought secure. In the dead of night, when the moon cast long, eerie shadows over Lakewood Springs, Sarah Collins, the girl everyone believed was just a shadow herself, moved with purpose. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration as she slipped through the town, her steps muffled by the soft, damp earth. The railroad, a looming promise of prosperity and change, was not just a line of steel and iron. It was a beacon of hope for those whose lives had been tethered to the whims of the powerful. What if the mighty had known that beneath their very noses plans were being spun like silk from the darkest corners? The night visitors, the coded messages, the missing book from Mr. Collins's house. These were the threads of a tapestry being woven by those they deemed invisible. The rail revolution, they would soon realize, was not heralded by the loud clamor of engines or the clanging of steel, but by the soft murmurs and the silent, determined steps of those with nothing to lose. The storm that swept over Lakewood Springs was not just of the weather. It was a tempest of secrets and subterfuge. Amidst the chaos, Sarah, cloaked in darkness, her key, a secret weapon, infiltrated the sanctum of local governance. Meanwhile, Isaiah Montgomery, drenched to the bone, stood in the telegraph office, a silent ally in the shadows. The wire to Boston was open, and with each tick of the telegraph, the future was being reclaimed, one coded message at a time. The morning brought no relief, only the harsh light of revelation. At Holloway's Tavern, the town's elite gathered, their faces etched with confusion and fear. "What do you mean, disappeared?" Mayor Marshall's voice was a hiss, his pallor betraying his alarm. "Documents don't just disappear." The judge, his tie now a noose around his neck, muttered about the locked cabinet, the key in his possession alone. But what of the man they all underestimated? What if they had seen the resolve in Isaiah's eyes, the quiet strength that had carried him through years of marginalization? The truth was, the keys to their future were not in their hands, but in those they never thought to watch. As the clock struck 10, the church bells chimed melodiously, signaling the arrival of a special train at the quaint station. From it descended three men, their suits as crisp as the morning air. A representative from the Continental Railroad Company, a federal officer from the Department of the Interior, and a journalist from the Boston Globe stepped onto the platform. Isaiah, with a knowing nod, guided them through the heart of town along Main Street, where an eager crowd was already assembling around freshly posted documents. The air was electric with whispers and gasps as the townsfolk, once indifferent, now poured over the explosive revelations from Collins's Red Book. "It's a forgery!" Mayor Marshall bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmur from the tavern doorway. "Fabricated lies and your signature on every page, Mayor," the federal representative inquired with a cool, polite tone. "Or perhaps the map which shows your plan to alter the railroad's route for personal gain is the forgery." In a desperate bid to escape scrutiny, Walter Schmidt attempted a hasty retreat through the back, only to be confronted by the resolute figure of the sheriff. "Did you know?" Schmidt asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Not everything," the sheriff responded, his eyes steady, "but enough to let justice take its course." The crowd swelled their faces, reflecting a blend of astonishment and a newfound respect for Isaiah. However, the most poignant moment came when Sarah, stepping out from the church, stood beside Reverend Thornton. "This brave young woman," the Reverend declared, his voice resonant with pride, "has at great personal peril uncovered evidence of crimes that touch each soul in our community." Sarah, her posture defiant yet graceful, locked eyes with her father, whose rage was palpable as he approached the scene. As Collins lunged toward her, a menacing growl escaping his lips, the federal officer's voice cut through the tension like a sharp blade. "I wouldn't advise that," he interjected with a calm authority. "Your daughter has already shared with us the extent of your deceit, how you and the mayor have been forging property documents, stripping at least 7 families of their rightful homes over the past 2 years. A telegram delivered publicly to Judge Davis stirred the crowd with whispers and murmurs. The Massachusetts Bar Association, a reporter announced with a hint of intrigue, is deeply interested in unraveling how a man once expelled for judicial misconduct now presides as a judge in another state. The mayor, his face contorted with panic, hissed, "You can't do this. This town belongs to me." But the railroad representative, with a voice dripping with irony, corrected him. "Belonged, Mr. Mayor. The Continental Company is rather keen to understand how our confidential plans were leaked to the public so prematurely." The chaos that followed was a spectacle meticulously chronicled for posterity. The mayor's futile attempt to flee, Holloway's desperate confession, and Collins' enraged screams as officers seized the red book from her home, these were moments etched in time. Then came the heart-rending scene where Sarah, standing tall before the crowd, confronted her father. "You sold me," she declared, her voice unwavering, "as if I were nothing more than a piece of property, just like you sold the soul of this town." Cornered, Collins' cruelty was laid bare for all to see. "What did you expect?" he spat venomously. "Your mother ran away, unable to stand the sight of you, a constant reminder of our mistake. You were never worth the air you breathed." The silence that followed was palpable, only to be shattered by Isaiah's serene voice. "Every person here is of equal worth, Mr. Collins. This is the truth you've tried to bury, that human dignity is priceless." As the conspirators were led away, the turmoil didn't subside. Rather, it evolved. Some in the crowd clamored for swift justice, while others who once might have shunned Isaiah now yearned to bask in the glow of a moral victory. Yet few paid attention to the quiet exchange between the railroad representative and Isaiah, or how the federal officer meticulously pored over Montgomery's land deeds, his eyes scanning each line with the precision of a hawk. Meanwhile, unnoticed by the crowd, Ruth and Sarah shared a fleeting look of understanding when the reporter approached them for an interview. The very foundations of the town had trembled, yet one enigma lingered, whispered like a secret in the shadows of the town square as people slowly drifted away. How had a man of color and a young woman, once sold into servitude, not only managed to endure, but to outmaneuver the titans who dominated their society? The answer was etched in the papers, displayed in the letters exchanged with Boston, and in a plan that had been set into motion long before the auction block. This plan, whose roots had been tenderly planted years ago, when a college professor crossed paths with a former slave, determined to alter the world one letter at a time, had now blossomed into reality. 6 months after the day that forever altered Lakewood Springs, the sun ascended over a town reborn. The railroad station, once merely a pawn in manipulative schemes, now loomed majestically at the edge of Isaiah Montgomery's property. Far from being seized, his land had become the very heart of a new commercial artery, a strategic pivot by the Continental Company after uncovering the instability of Mayor Marshall's originally proposed route. Isaiah's humble cabin now stood alongside a school. What started as impromptu lessons for 3 black children, shunned by the city's educational system, had swiftly evolved into a burgeoning institution drawing families from far and wide. Sarah Collins, now Sarah Montgomery, after a modest wedding officiated by Reverend Thornton, managed the classes with the same steely resolve that had toppled an empire of deceit. "I never imagined I'd be teaching," she mused one afternoon, her eyes sweeping over the 20 students, a diverse tapestry of black, white, and immigrant faces, all eager for knowledge. Under the sprawling branches of the majestic tree that served as their sanctuary on scorching days, I was that girl I's forever cast down voice, barely a whisper when addressed. Yet amidst the sawdust and sweat of his carpentry, Isaiah, with his knowing smile, would often say, "I always knew you had a fire within, just waiting for a breath of air to ignite it." His words, a gentle stoking, kindled a spark in me. The town had its share of shadows too. The former Mayor Marshall was now a mere echo in the cold confines of the state penitentiary, his fate sealed by charges of fraud and extortion. Judge Davis, once a pillar of justice, had vanished into the night, only to be rumored as captured in Chicago under an assumed name. Frank Holloway, his once bustling tavern, now a memory, had retreated to the solitude of a distant river, laboring as a longshoreman. And Sarah's father, Collins, once a man of stature, was now a ghost of his former self, living off the charity of others, shunned and pitiful. At the weekly gathering where the heart of our community beats strongest, Ruth Wilkins, her voice brimming with excitement, announced, "We've received a reply from Benson." The group, a mosaic of Lakewood Springs transformation, included Jenkins, the telegraph operator, whose fingers had sent countless messages of hope, and Sheriff Jensen, who had finally aligned with the side of righteousness. Benson, a beacon of knowledge from Boston University, had once recognized the raw legal brilliance in a self-taught former slave, guiding him towards understanding his rights. It was Benson who, with foresight, had suggested Isaiah purchase that seemingly barren land, a plot that now lay along the bustling railroad tracks. He accepts our proposal to expand the educational project. Ruth continued, her eyes alight with the promise of the future. 15 scholarships for our youth, Sarah whispered, her fingers tracing the faint scar on her wrist, a testament to a life she had left behind, now feeling like a story of someone else. The following morning, as the first commercial train chugged into Lakewood Springs Station, there was an undeniable sense of a new beginning, a town reborn from its own ashes. The ceremony was intimate yet charged with an air of transformation. The new mayor, a beacon of integrity and an honest businessman chosen through a special election, delivered a speech filled with promises of progress and renewal. However, the spotlight subtly shifted to the Montgomerys, who stood quietly at the sidelines. "It's all because of you, so," an elderly woman murmured to Sarah, her voice quivering with gratitude. This was the same woman who had once averted her gaze when passing Sarah on the street mere months ago. "My son got a job at the station." They would never have considered a boy like him before. Across the platform, her son, a young man with one leg shorter than the other, stood proudly in his railroad uniform, his face alight with joy as he waved cheerfully. "We didn't do it alone," Sarah responded, her smile radiating sincerity. "That's what they don't grasp about justice," Isaiah later reflected as they strolled home beneath the vibrant orange evening sky. "It's not merely about punishing the wrongdoers. It's about constructing something better from the ashes." Sarah paused, her gaze sweeping over the city, sprawling beneath them, lights beginning to dance in the windows. "When I was on that platform being auctioned like livestock, all I yearned for was revenge. I wanted everyone to feel my pain," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. Isaiah nodded, his understanding profound. "And now I see that true freedom isn't just about breaking chains," she continued. "It's about setting a table where everyone has a place." She turned to look at the man beside her, the one who had risked everything for her, not out of pity, but driven by principle. "They tried to tell us we were worthless, that I was just merchandise, and you were merely an interloper on this land," she said, her voice rising in defiance. "And yet we've shown that our worth was never theirs to dictate," Isaiah added, his tone resolute. On the horizon, the silhouettes of the new train station's towers stood stark against the fiery sky, a testament to an economy now serving all, not just the elite. In the schoolrooms, the maps and books that once whispered of distant futures now sang with the melodies of dreams that had been unimaginable mere months before. In the hallowed halls of City Hall, where once the seeds of exploitation were sown, now stood a vibrant, diverse council, their voices blending in harmonious debate over community upliftment. Neither Isaiah nor Sarah could have foreseen how that desperate, dust-choked act in the square, a black man purchasing a young woman at auction, would become the ember that not only scorched the roots of entrenched corruption, but also kindled a beacon illuminating countless lives. Isaiah often shared with his students that the essence of a revolution isn't in the demolition of barriers, but in the construction of bridges where only divides once existed. In a world sculpted by divisions, Isaiah and Sarah demonstrated that human dignity indeed transcends the barriers of race, class, and circumstance. When those deemed lesser refuse to be confined by the chains of others' expectations, the very fabric of worlds can shift. "They tried to break us," Sarah would declare to her new students on their inaugural day in class. But they overlooked that sometimes what's broken can refract light in ways the unbroken never could. If tales of societal metamorphosis, bravery against oppression, and the human spirit's victory over tyranny stir your soul, do not hesitate to subscribe. Join us for more narratives that echo an eternal truth. One's worth is not measured by the price others might pay, but by the passion with which one fights for their convictions. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Your comments, like shares, and subscriptions are not just actions, they are the sparks that keep our fire burning. Let us continue to learn, grow, and transform together.